It's the Bird Reboot podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans? He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Bird Reboot.
Hello there, Arizona Cardinals fans. You've got Blake and Marcos Pancake Soul that are here tonight with your Bird Reboot podcast back at our regularly scheduled Wednesday night time. We are going to be joined tonight here by the Cardinals godfather himself, our podfather, you could call him in a way. Joe Como. Joe Como13 is going to be here with us, a.k.a. the Cardinal Rule. TCR, how are you doing tonight? And welcome to the podcast.
I am well, my friends. I mean, this Cardinals season was I'm not going to use the term I would like to use, but it was a debacle. But hope springs eternal, and it's actually kind of exciting. New coaches, potentially a new quarterback. We'll see. So I'm here, and I'm excited and ready to talk some Cardinals with you guys.
Exactly. It's going to be really fun, honestly, I think, to go over, because we went from going over very little as far as how we were going to talk about this offseason. We were going to talk about who is the quarterback potentially going to be, what do they do with Kyler Murray. Instead, now we got this coaching interview, this coach is fired from here, this place. There's just a lot of content to go over and talk about, which is honestly really great. But as we dig into some of that here, it's been raining down in Arizona all day today. The rains of change, as you could say, are sweeping through. That change included Jonathan Gannon, the Cardinals head coach. He was let go after a 3-14 season, the worst of the 3-14 seasons that we can say, because there was no 14-loss season the Arizona Cardinals had ever had. It had always been a 3-13 season as the worst. Some of the thoughts, at least, that you've got, Joe, we've talked about some of our share. We felt like on the schematic side of things, there was just a lack of issues of being able to get stops on the defensive side. And when you're a defensive head coach, that can be really problematic. The offense and maybe some of the commitments to Drew Petzing, some of letting good coaches go, struggling to find a way in the run game, and injuries, I think all played a part. But what's some of your insight on why Jonathan Gannon wasn't brought back for a fourth year for the Arizona Cardinals?
I think it really came down to how uncompetitive they were down the stretch. I don't even think he had to win a game down the stretch to save his job. I think he just had to not get blown out so much. And, listen, injuries have been such a big problem for the Cardinals this year. And we don't like to make excuses with injuries, but every metric shows they had the worst injury situation in the league this year. But when I look at it, most of the key players that they lost in injury were on offense. They lost a few guys on defense, but they had enough talented players on defense that if this coaching staff had done what they were brought here to do, they could have put up a better fight on defense. The offense struggled at points, but moved the ball. They were actually, I think, overperformed considering, the amount of injuries they had. But yes, they had some injuries, but they had pass rushers. They had Josh Sweat, who had double-digit sacks. Yes, they lost him a little bit towards the end. They had, some injuries on cornerbacks, but they always had guys starting that I felt decent about. Even when guys were down, some of the guys they had that stepped in played well enough. They had enough players on defense in that this coaching staff, they did what they were supposed to do, at least kept those games close. And I think that is what really cost him his job. The fact, not that they lost so many in a row with those injuries, especially on offense. I think we kind of saw that's what was happening. But how quickly they lost down the stretch, I think was really what ended up sealing the deal for Gannon.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, we talked about it on the podcast with Marcos, that you had the Cardinals up 20-16 in that game, and then there's just 3 straight touchdowns scored while it goes 3 straight 3-and-outs for the Arizona Cardinals offense. It felt like as soon as they came to play, they were just outclassed. And so you can say, well, did they have a practice squad roster? You can argue. I think that second half of the roster was good enough to win games, maybe not good enough to actually go out and be a consistent winner, but being able to be competitive, and the lack of being competitive, I think, is what it was. They went 0-6 in the division, ended up finishing pretty low ranked in the special teams. And when you're taking a look at least at just how many blowout games were by 3 scores or more, I think that all led to it being a spot where it was untenable to say that this is a competitive team next year. That's going to be something, at least, that's going to be really tough. I think, to be able to then sell to a fan base that, from all accounts and purposes, was probably bleeding tickets. Marcos, what do you say as far as for part of with Jonathan Gannon and some of that departure?
Part of that, my obviously the consensus with me was that most of the I was having issues with the actions with that the fact that this defense did not kind of set themselves beyond what they were supposed to do when they actually got the bodies in, they actually got the players in. So to me, it was the same schematic type of even though last year they blitzed more often than they did this year. They just didn't want to push the pressure. They didn't want to call any more blitzes than they wanted to.
Yeah.
Call blitzes. It was a sim blitz or it was a creeper blitz, which still sends 4 pass rushers over to the quarterback. And of course, when it comes to the offense, when you lose your best guy in Clay Adams and Clayton Adams, where he left, and offensive line coaches are very, very very not precious, but like very important to like an offense and whatnot. I I don't know why letting him go was even the option. I know that he got himself a higher title with the Cowboys and somewhat of a pay grade, but from what I believe is that like you can also just match that type of pay grade or even try to like maintain him inside the building. And they just said, you know what, we're gonna be fine. It's not something that is that important. He doesn't. The impact that comes from it is going to be negligent. Let's go ahead and go get Justin Fry from the college ranks, and we all saw what ended up becoming of that. So the culmination of both of them, the uncertainty of what's going on with Kyler Murray or what's going on with a lot of these players on the roster, like Elijah Jones, I was just done with that. So I can't wait to see what's gonna like what we have waiting for us.
Yeah, it's a place where, like you said, they let go of one coach, and we saw that last year they were the 6th rated rushing offense in the NFL, according to some of the Pro Football Focus grades. Defense was around like 27 to 29th, and so you added a bunch of pieces to the defense. You drafted almost solely on defense, outside of 6th round pick Hayden Connor on the offensive line. You expected people like Marv and others, Michael Wilson, to be able to step up, and some did, but one of the biggest problems that the team had was you needed that defense that went from having pretty much no one on the defensive line to an NFL caliber defensive line, needed to be able to get better against the run, be able to rush the passer better than they had. And when they started playing more of that base defense, where it wasn't just simply, we're going to innovate by putting Buda Baker down on the line, rotating our safeties in the background, having Kazir White as a main blitzer, we're just going to rush 4 guys, drop 7, and be able just to kind of play our coverage game. They got picked apart in a lot of those zone coverages. We would see a lot of that during the Rams game. I remember at times I was almost yelling out at the TV. Rams are in 3rd and 2. Cardinals drop back to cover because they're trying to watch these tight ends in the pass game. And up front, they would then rush forward on these 3rd and shorts to be able to pick up first downs, and just kind of kept slowly moving down the field. And whenever there was a big play to be made, if it wasn't to Puka Nacua, those tight ends were just running small intermediate routes against those deep zones where, sure, you're not going to give up a 40-yard touchdown bomb, but you're then going to give up a 17-yard pass play on 2nd and 10 that would keep the chains moving. It felt like the defensive philosophy of Arizona just was fundamentally a very conservative philosophy. It didn't take a lot of risks, and when it comes to the NFC West, with guys like Mike McDonald, with Robert Saleh, even with the Rams and Chris Shula, you see a lot of these more riverboat gamblers that are gambling and winning all the time on the defensive side of the ball. And that's where it felt like Jonathan Gannon just got outmatched to me by a lot of his peers. Do you disagree with any of that, Joe?
No, I mean, really, when you're looking at a team that is not winning and is not playing well, you could just play conservative and do what you're doing and keep losing, or take some chances and either win or lose big, right? And like you have, as our and Bruce Arians used to say, no risk it, no biscuit. But like, if what you're doing isn't working, then you got to take some shots. And so schematically, I know that there were a lot of people who questioned that about when he was with Philadelphia, right? So, and how aggressive was he or should he have been? So I don't agree with that, especially when you look at the results. They needed to do something different, and I think being more aggressive would have been when you can't bring in new players that are going to make a big difference in the middle of the season. You got to do something different. So maybe taking some more shots in terms of your blitz packages is one way you can do that.
Yeah, definitely agree. Hey, let's go. I know it's not halftime yet on the Bird Reboot podcast, but let's go ahead and just have a couple of our commenters who pop in. We've got Bucks 1945 is first. We've got Dana popping up at least over here saying that Joe is definitely here. So we're glad that you're able to join us, Dana. We've got JZ Jace is here as well, saying that Justin Fry leaving is nice. He was terrible. I'd have loved to have seen him a second year because I think the starting caliber offensive lineman for the Cardinals, it just was not what I think we expected. It needed to be as good or an improvement. Instead, it fell off. But we did see late season some of the guys he worked with in John Gaines started performing better. Isaiah Adams was able to go from being kind of a liability to a stud player. I would have loved to have seen a second year from Justin Fry just to be able to see, was it something where he just struggled in the run game and then needed a year to adapt with the coaching? We saw late some production, but overall it was definitely a huge step back, and it was a huge plus for the Dallas Cowboys. We've also got at Red Sea under here going dad, talking about the podfather himself at least as well. So yes, Joe's definitely like a father to love us to all of the father to all of us here in this family of TCR podcasts, as we can say. But yeah, so that's where it's been with Jonathan Gannon. We get to see the departure for Nick Rollis as well. Is there any regrets that you think you have, Joe, about this kind of era as we like close the chapter of Arizona Cardinals football, of Jonathan Gannon football? Like some people have brought up, are you upset that we're not going to find out who rode the bus today? There's people who are looking back at some of the Gannon memes. There's areas that for me, what felt sad is like just knowing at least that this is one of those coaches you brought in who is a family man, has like a lot of time that he's dedicated to like being able to do well, has a scouting background, wanted to actually like build a culture and do teaching steps. Like they started off their first couple of camps with the Cardinals in saying, here's the fundamentals, here's why we're going to teach what we're going to teach, and here's where we're going to be. Like there's a lot of positives that were not here during the Cliff Kingsbury, Vance Joseph years that I thought the Cardinals had started to lay a foundation. And it felt like after this second season, a lot of the culture, it seemed like, was just gone. Are there any other regrets you would feel like you'd see, or anything that at least any kind of parting words with the Jonathan Gannon era?
Yeah, I know, fans were ready to see him gone because of what the result was on the field, right? The product on the field this season. And it was probably the most, when I look at Arizona Cardinals seasons, and I've been a fan for a long time. I mean, I'm old enough that I remember when they moved to Arizona. I cannot think of another season where the results were so much worse than the expectations, right? Year 3 of the rebuild. Like we've had seasons that were probably this bad in general, but those seasons not expect to be pushing for the playoffs. But if I have a regret, it's that, and I know some people will take this the wrong way. I'm not saying he didn't get a fair chance, because I think he had a chance to save his job despite the record. As I talked about before, if they had played more and had this record, he might have kept the job. But what I do regret is that he didn't have this season with a health, because I think there's a universe where those, where some of the key players don't go down in offense, that this team is much better. That he get fired. Maybe they don't necessarily make the playoffs, but I do think injuries was a big part. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't have fired him. I actually generally think, yeah, we need a change. I think fans are so frustrated that they may not want to, even entertain this thought. But I do think like that with some key injuries not happening, this I think he may have had a chance this year. It was just a really bad hand, and then they misplayed that really bad hand down the end. I do think is better. A lot of that I think is Monty, especially in terms of things getting leaked getting leaked anymore. There's there's it's a much tighter ship with Monty. It feels like the adults are in the room with Monty, and I do think that JG do some good things culturally that we needed, post Cliff Kingsbury era. I am hopeful we someone else who will take that to the next step, to the next level. He seems like a good guy, and I don't think he's a bad coach, but yeah, it's time to move on.
Yeah, I felt like it's something where you don't have to be I think at the end of the day, can you say that he was a good coach? Maybe, but you can't just be a good coach. You have to be a great coach, I think, at least, not just for this organization, but within this division and just within the NFL overall. It's something that's very interesting, at least, to be able to see. Let's go ahead and shift our topic now as we talk about some exciting stuff, which is going to be new head coaching options for the Arizona Cardinals. We got a nice little PowerPoint presentation for you guys here that we'll be able to go over as we talk about just some of these options. One of the biggest things I think we can start with is, all right, we came off of Jonathan Gannon. What do we like and what do we want? And what are the things we need to find that are different? So I've got a quick couple of things that I've pulled up together here. I think you got to start with a leader of men. One of the problems that we saw at the end of the Cliff Kingsbury regime was ultimately that the players had a lot of respect for Vance Joseph in the room. Kingsbury, I think a lot of people said at the end of the day, he was less the Dan Campbell, Vance Joseph, or like I would even say the Mike Tomlin type of leader. And more of like the kind of guy who like you would be able to go chat ball with, have a beer with, who was just kind of happy to be here at the end of the day, I think. That's one of the things I think you need. I think you need to have smart offensive and defensive minds on the staff. I would argue experience may be important for at least one of those two sides of the ball, if not both. You want someone who can keep up with the rest of the West. I don't think you need to have the best coach in the division, the best in the division, but I think that you want someone who is going to keep up with their peers. And you've got probably 3 of the top 5 coaches in the NFL in this division. If you can get a top 10 coach consistently, then that would be a home run. That's someone who I think can keep up with the rest of the West. You want experience at the NFL level. I don't think going to the college ranks like they did with Kingsbury is going to cut it. You want to make sure you also have someone who maybe if they are experience as a head coach would matter. You want someone who's got a history of winning, being from a franchise of winning. You want someone who's got abilities for the teaching the fundamentals, I'd say, on the defensive level, being innovative as well. And I think the one other thing is you might be looking for someone who's got a connection to Monty Ossenfort, someone who's been working with him in the past. So as we go over these topics, Joe, I'll start with you. Is there anything that you would want to add to this list of Arizona Cardinals' next head coach?
That's a really good question. I think for me, and I don't know how this fits in here, I have this bimodal approach. There's 2 categories of coaches I could go in, and I want them to lean into one of those or the other. Either I want them to go with the offensive wunderkind, the offensive, an offensive coordinator like a Kubiak, right? Or Thomas Brown, who is an up and coming guy, and just go all in with a guy. Now, I know people will say, well, they did that with Cliff, but the problem was something you mentioned earlier. What they did with Cliff is they went to the college ranks. And although I don't believe you need to have had coaching experience in the NFL, I believe you need NFL coaching experience to make that step. And that was a problem with Cliff, in my view, one of the biggest problems. So either you go with that approach or you get the guy who is going to be a dude in terms of what he brings on the defensive side. Like for me, that's Robert Saleh, right? The guy who is going to build a really good defense. The defense will be good. And then hopefully we can figure out something offensively and be a run-heavy game and lean that way. You build one of those 2 ways, in my view, and I don't think you go no half-assing it, right? No hedging, no in between, no kind of a good defensive coach, kind of and I'll tell you, if we'll get to Matt Nagy. To me, as much he's a veteran head coach, I don't think the evidence is that he's this dynamic offensive mind, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, no halfway, right? Either lean into the guy who's going to build you an elite defense and figure out how to run the ball and do enough on offense, or go all in on the one wunderkid offensive mind.
Yeah, I think those are good. Marcos, anything you'd want to be able to say as well when it comes to talking about just some of the expectations, what you're looking for as the Cardinals' next head coach?
Well, the keep up with the West part was the thing that I actually really like about this list. You pretty much covered almost everything because with me it's keep up with the West and innovation that obviously they already added, so I'm not adding to it. But those are kind of my like big time. The reason why I think about this is because I think about one person and one person only whenever I think about this list and how from outside of the division somebody came in and is already coaching a team that is probably a Super Bowl favorite. That right there, it's a possibility that you can get somebody from outside of the division or somebody that could just be brand new as long as he has the fortitude to be able to like have that mind, it constantly change up, constantly innovate, constantly be one of the top dogs in the in when it comes to like the moving forward with like the cyclical uh part of the football where you're gonna see an adjustment to an adjustment to an adjustment. I do not want a kind of like like somewhat like of a stagnant position where we bring somebody in and they say, I'm good at this and this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it. Because those people tend to be like, hey, I found success with this type of system. So I
Mm,
know that if I get my guys and I bring in my people, I can have success with that system. And that's exactly kind of what Jonathan Gannon represented when he came from Philly. He tried to institute that same system, not the same players, but he didn't want to change it. And then on the offensive side, they wanted a ball dominant, clock management type of offense because he wasn't confident that he wanted to keep his defense out there for long periods of time. Because in that circumstance, he probably was going to be like, look, with these players in my system, we're just going to bend, but hopefully we don't break. And
mm.
then obviously when it starts breaking, that's it. So the person I keep, I'm not sure if you guys can guess who I was talking about, the person outside of the division. It's pretty clear. It's Mike McDonald. I really
Yeah.
wanted Mike McDonald when he was available. And I even had mentioned I think in our podcast, I said, I kind of wish we could have fired Jonathan Gannon and just gone after Mike McDonald. And he's taken this defense when nobody gave him a shot. When everybody was saying before the season started, okay, you guys are going to be in a rebuilding year. You guys are going to figure out what the heck you're going to do. We don't know what Mike McDonald is bringing to the table. And I'm like, he's bringing a very smart defensive mind, and he's our rival now.
Yeah, that's something with Mike McDonald that it was almost instant results. They fired their offensive coordinator, brought in a new one, which wasn't able to get to in a little bit. But it's that idea that you don't have to necessarily wait for a 2 to 3 year rebuild. You don't need to have someone just pull in a couple of guys over the next 2 to 3 years. We saw a lot of Jonathan Gannon's guys, at least on the defensive side, over the last couple of years. And it turned into, unfortunately, just was not something that ended up being sustainable for winning football. Now, one thing we can at least go over when we're starting to talk about individual candidates is you got to find who's available. So I've talked with Marcos a bit. We're not going to talk about it tonight. I've been of the opinion that if you wanted to trade a draft pick for a current head coach, the cost usually to a team for a quality head coach is going to be too high. It cost, I believe, a second round pick for Sean Payton in addition to his contract. It would have been the Cardinals' late first round pick is basically what it would have been back in 2024. I don't see this as being a need to have to trade for a coach. Now, the Cardinals, granted, did in the way trade for Jonathan Gannon because they kind of tempered a little bit, self-reported, and then were able to actually bring someone in. But if there is a coach that's worth trading for, one of those just hit the market, and that would be John Harbaugh, who was let go. In a shock to many people, he was let go from the Baltimore Ravens, maybe not a shock because a lot of people had said the messaging had gone stale. A lot of players seemed like were just not quite as disciplined in this past year. He had a very talented, I would say, offensive coordinator in Todd Monken. His defensive coordinator, Zach Orr. He is where Mike McDonald came from with that defense. He is now a free agent on the market. The reports is that they're going to find someone who is going to probably get the most out of Lamar Jackson. And it's an old friend. A lot of people are saying that Cliff Kingsbury, who is going to likely interview for a head coach, will probably be an offensive coordinator option for the Ravens. So keep that tucked away in the back of your head if that's going to happen. John Harbaugh is the best option. He was with the Ravens for 18 years, has a record, I believe, of like 118 wins. He's got a better record of wins, I think, as a head coach than I would say the Arizona Cardinals have had wins-wise over the past 10, 15, maybe almost 20 years as far as winning would go. It's one of those places, at least, where he immediately becomes the top candidate amidst the field. Joe, this is something where a lot of Cardinals fans, how much of this is dreaming or how much of this is a reality that the Arizona Cardinals just need to do whatever it takes to get this guy as their next head coach?
I just think it's a pipe dream. I don't think he's coming here. I think he's going to have his pick of jobs. I think there are jobs that have much clearer paths to dominating their division, like Atlanta, New York Giants, especially Atlanta, though, that division, right? I know he's been tied to the Giants. But I just have a hard time him picking a team that is in the toughest division in the NFL, arguably, with the toughest competition, with an ownership organizational situation that has legitimate questions, right? Michael, that we all know the criticisms, and in a situation where he could have his pick of the jobs, what would bring him here? And people might say money. Other teams can offer him the money. So what is going to get him to come here? Bidwell, even if I don't think he can pay enough to get him to choose us when other teams will still pay him something in at least close enough range to that. So I think he's going to go somewhere where he's got a quick path to winning that division, and we are not that.
Yeah, Marcos, this is one where I think, from what it sounds like, the Cardinals are not the leaders in the clubhouse. This is not the most desirable job. There's some good points that were made based off of, I think it was Peter Schrager reported and said, hey, like if he's going to have offset contract from the Ravens and someone like the Cardinals is like, maybe we can't afford to pay him. He could then say, hey, if I want to coach your team, are you going to pay me $10 million a year? The Ravens are on the hook for the other $8 million. That could be a spot where you could give him a new $18 million guaranteed deal. But the Ravens, I think it's underneath that amount. The Ravens would take on some of that contract. Could be a way where you could say, hey, the next 2 or 3 years while you're saving up some money, you could go ahead and he'll continue to get paid by the Ravens. That's something at least where if you're looking for constructing a long-term deal, it could be doable, even if you don't have the cash up front. But ultimately, I'm in kind of a similar spot of saying, what are the strengths that I'm looking for if I'm someone like John Harbaugh? I'd say I want to look for stability at general manager and ownership. I want to look for stability at quarterback, and I want to look for the ability to win right away. And I think that you're really having questions with the Cardinals at all three of those spots right now. Even if Kyler Murray comes back and would play for John Harbaugh, that's something where I think that there is a lack of stability at those three different places. And when it comes to how much money he'd make per year, you're probably talking about a $20 million per year contract. This is what I'll say, at least, to if you want to just say this is no chance whatsoever. There was one specific example in the past where the Cardinals did manage to get a guy like this into their organization, and it was that they went above and beyond and just offered more money than anyone else was willing to offer, and that was with J.J. Watt. That was part of with J.J. Watt picked the Cardinals over the Packers, when he left the Texans, because the Cardinals were willing just to say, we're going to pay what we need to get you into our building because we need you to win. And it did result in the Cardinals for that 7-0 start being productive and winning, but it did cost a pretty penny. I lean more toward you and say that I don't think that this is much of an option compared to a job like the Giants, even compared to a job without a quarterback such as the Falcons. I think that this is more of a pipe dream that is fun to think about, but I think when it comes down to it, I think that he's going to be going elsewhere unless things rapidly change in some time within, the next 48 to 72 hours. Marcos, some of your thoughts, at least, on John Harbaugh before I get into one of the kind of surprising reasons I wouldn't necessarily take on a John Harbaugh.
Well, just like everybody, we have our ear to the ground when it comes to like trying to see where the trends are going and what's being said and whatnot. And once John Harbaugh was fired, it was said that like there was teams calling for him that already had head coaches on the staff. It's not like, hey, we have a vacant spot as at head coach, and we're gonna call and then see if he has any interest in obviously not taking a year off, like people have said he's gonna take a year off and go to media and then do the same thing that Sean Payne did. If he's ready to go now, they're they want to acquire him. But then there's also teams that already have a head coach who are willing to fire their head coach just to give him the opportunity to not only interview for them, but go ahead and take the job, which I don't even know how that's going to work, because then you're kind of outing your own head coach. But that is the supposed rumor going around, that that's how coveted he is. Of course, just like you guys have mentioned, it is a pipe dream. The Giants is the one that keeps coming up, just like Joe Camo said, that, like, that's the one that he has the most ties to, mostly because of the fact that it's not only a big market, they have their established, quarterback in Jackson Dart. They have pieces. Their defense is actually has a lot of studs all around that defense. It just needs stability finally for that organization to go. And the Cardinals, to be able to do that and go ahead and pull him, well, you're pulling him. He's gonna have to either draft a quarterback or run it back with Kyler Murray in this organization that just basically told Kyler Murray, like, hey, we're gonna sit you because you are injured, quote unquote. And it's like the relationship there is just messy. He just would never even come to an organization like this under these circumstances.
Yeah, I know. There's some comments, at least on this. Elite Flight saying Harbaugh is making about $17 million a season or so, saying he would not sign a deal below market. But he is the number one candidate. Like, it'd be a huge home run. Like, 9 teams have made inquiries. There's 7 openings. You can say 6 of those because of the fact that so you're talking about teams with current head coaches have made inquiries. Now, one of those teams we know we can rule out today, which is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They are running it back next year with Todd Bowles, but that was one that there was definitely some rumblings. I've also talked a little bit about the Dolphins. The other thing, at least, too, is Harbaugh's judgment about his coordinators is much better than JG's. Keith Davis. There is one question I have with some of John Harbaugh and the judgment. There was a lot of stuff where you look at the Ravens and wonder how much of that judgment and how much of that became a message where you weren't listening to the coaches in the end. There was a number of years that they had their kicker, Justin Tucker, we found out had a bunch of sexual assault violations that came out. He was tolerated for a while. Either they didn't know or they kept him on the roster a bit long. He ironically had a kicker miss a kick this past year, which is what led to John Harbaugh's firing. I do wonder if bringing in a guy who is a special teams coach, who maybe brings some good coaches who get promoted, but if the message had gone stale, the worst case scenario to this spot would have been a Pete Carroll situation. Like, you bring in this veteran guy, he's been around for years, he's going to right the ship, and it just had gone stale and it was time to move on, and now the Raiders have moved on from Pete Carroll. That's like your worst case scenario for John Harbaugh, or if you're looking for a reason why not to, but I think it'll tend to be more the direction of the winning, I think, would continue with the likes of a John Harbaugh. Speaking at least of winning, we can move to the next candidate who had a history of winning with the San Francisco 49ers, had a history of losing with the New York Jets, and then got back to a history of winning this season by going back to the San Francisco 49ers, and that's Robert Saleh, the defensive coordinator and former New York Jets head coach. This is one of those guys that I think it's not the offensive innovation that you'd be looking for, but it would be, I think, by all accounts, if you're talking about a grand slam being John Harbaugh, to me, this would be kind of the home run level of hire. You know that you're going to get a fast, physical, and disciplined defense because that's followed him wherever he went. Even when the Jets were a bad team, that defense was still good under him. He's also going to have guys that come from the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree, which is a lot of offensive and innovative guys. He's a guy that the Cardinals have requested to interview. We had it scheduled according to NFL.com. Whether that is actually the case or if that was a mistake, we're not quite sure of. But would he then move from a team across division? Joe, this is one of those guys that I think we've talked a little bit about. He's probably one of those guys that is a gem. Maybe he's not as attainable as some of the other coaching candidates are, but he's more attainable if you're a Cardinals fan than maybe the likes of John Harbaugh.
Yeah, and this is one of the guys I really like as a candidate. This on the defensive side, this is my top guy. If we're going the defensive route, I think he did not get a fair shake with the Jets. I mean, Zach Wilson and the husk of Aaron Rodgers. That was not a good offensive situation, and then his coordinator situation wasn't great. So I don't hold that against him. I think. It's a little bit more. I think we would see more of an outcomes like what the Texans have seen with DeMeco Ryans, right? Except I think he's probably a better coach than DeMeco Ryans. And DeMeco Ryans is a really good defensive coach. So I think Saleh would be, to me, a slam dunk. Yes, the offense They'd have to figure out what they're doing coordinator wise. I think there would be some options out there. And like I said before, you would then build a team with an elite defense, strong running game, and enough offense. And there are teams that win that way. So I would really love that. Like if you can get one side of the ball elite, you can have a puncher's chance, right? So I really do like this option. I don't know, how likely we are to have a chance at him. The betting odds have him kind of lower, I think, in terms of the options. But on the defensive side of the ball, this is my top guy.
Yeah, it's apparently the Cardinals have been the one team that have reached out about his availability. It's possible that they're the ones who just want him first. He's one of those guys that they're looking after. Marcos, from watching the Niners defense this year, it was essentially a team without Fred Warner, without Nick Bosa. They were still respectable ultimately on defense, and it wasn't, I think, simply a talent issue. Now, Dane was mentioning it took 3 years for Saleh to get the Jets defense to 7th in the league. I think you take a look at this Cardinals roster and the Niners roster being similar to when Kyle Shanahan was hired and when Jonathan Gannon was hired. You're already probably 3 years into your rebuild on the defensive side. Maybe it takes another year or two to be able to get into that top 7, top 10 sort of defensive level. But I think you're a step ahead of where the Niners were, because the Niners, if you remember back correctly, they were, I believe, the second worst team in all of the NFL when Kyle Shanahan came into that Niners team. They traded back one spot with, I believe it was the Chicago Bears, and they got an absolute bust of a pick in Solomon Thomas, who's still in the league. He's producing, but not to the level that top 3 hype train was worth. It wasn't until Jimmy Garoppolo came over that we actually saw that it looked like things were going to work out for the Niners. Some of your thoughts, at least, Marcos, with the defensive approach. It is a different defense that the Niners run from the Cardinals. It is going to be a little bit more of just standardized cover 3. There's going to be at least a little bit more linebacker blitzing that we're able to see, and it's going to definitely need to have solid edge rushers who can hold up on the edge, as we saw with having Nick Bosa and the Niners drafting an edge rusher this past year.
Yeah, it's a lot of it's kind of the same circumstance when it comes to zone, but he knows how to disguise his zone coverage, and he doesn't hold back and just send 4. He doesn't drop a defensive lineman often in coverage in the flat. He constantly tries to attack that middle with these blitzes, which is something that I've been pushing for since the Vance Joseph years of trying to send blitzes over the middle. As you can see, he's very good when it comes to developing his safeties. He can take cornerbacks and put him in a good position to succeed. He's not just adverse to man coverage cornerbacks and just pure zone corners. He is also a person who can you can quite frankly see him at the sidelines and stuff. He gets very, very pumped up. So he's not just there, just standing there with his arm crossed like he has in this picture, looking like Dr. Manhattan or whatever that guy is, the bad guy.
Oh yeah, he's like the anti-JG. Like he gets fired up on the sidelines, and I've seen JG get fired up on the sidelines too. But when you talk about wearing your emotion on your sleeve, that is the Robert Saleh approach that he takes to his coaching.
All I remember is him just getting pumped up and stuff, and that's why when your players are done with a good series and he's there smacking them in the back, giving them dabs and whatnot, the players feel that energy, and they play harder for their coach. Now, obviously, the defensive numbers aren't looking good as far as hey, why is this guy a top candidate with the 49ers? 49ers are ranked somewhere in the 20s when it comes to their defense. Well, first of all, you want to give him that head coaching job because, once again, you want him to be that guy who's going to set up your entire team, right the ship, hopefully give him a second chance and whatnot. But he is not going to tolerate anything less than that. And plus, they've had injuries themselves. But even though they've had injuries themselves, how many 40 burgers have they given up as opposed to our injuries, and most of them being on the offensive side and not on the defensive side? And how many 40 burgers have we given up?
Yeah, the Niners, at least this year, when you're taking a look at what they did as far as with points, I'm taking a look at least at pulling up the NFL defense stats. Like you said, they're missing their 2 best players on the defensive side of the ball. When it comes to the defensive for points per game that were allowed, they were right there in terms of the middle of the pack at 21.8, the lowest end being about 17.2. Cardinals were at the high end of the pack. They were 10 points higher at about 28.7. So you're talking about a about one touchdown difference or so. As far as total points that were given up in the season, the Seahawks were the best defense. The San Francisco 49ers were about top 12 when it comes to everything. One of the things that's really also interesting about the Robert Saleh defense is that it's pretty balanced. Like, they gave up a ton of passing yards. They were probably about bottom 10 in terms of passing yards per game. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they didn't have their best pass rushers, and we're talking about that, including Fred Warner, who is a guy who's had at least, I believe, 6 sacks or so in a season. They did pretty well overall against the run, giving up about 107 rushing yards per game. That was good enough for, I believe, 10th or 11th in the NFL this year. So you're talking about a guy who was undermanned, still had a productive defense. Now, if you wanted to talk about productive defense, we get to talk about our productive offensive guy over here, Clint Kubiak, who's leading the 2025 Seattle Seahawks, the most efficient offense in the NFL this season. They're a team that ranked inside of the top 10 as far as when it came to passing yards per game, when it came to rushing yards per game. They were top 10 in both. When it came to points per game, they were third, only behind the Los Angeles Rams this year in terms of that. He comes from a background of having worked previously under under the New Orleans Saints last year, which was a good defense, and it seemed like they hit a wall that led to Derek Carr's retirement. He's got Sam Darnold cooking, although some of that may be on Sam Darnold. He's one of those guys that's like the young, hot offensive coordinator, and if you want to talk about family ties, like the Harbaugh tree or the Shanahan tree, he's Gary Kubiak's kid. And that's something that goes a long way as far as growing up being a part of the game. Joe, this is not Cliff Kingsbury. This is Clint Kubiak, another 2K name. Right. What do you like about Kubiak, and what are the kind of questions or maybe concerns that you would have? Because he's one of those guys that seems like he would be too good for the Cardinals to get the young, hot coordinator name. But with having some guys in the class such as a Kevin Stefanski, a John Harbaugh, and even a name escaped me for a second, Robert Saleh in the coaching carousel this year, he's become a guy that the Cardinals could maybe be able to land this year.
Yeah, when Sam Darnold went to the Seahawks, I had questions. Would he be able to sustain, right? Because we know that in Minnesota, the coach O'Connell, his reputation is sort of a quarterback whisperer, that he gets the best out of his quarterback. So did he make Darnold into who he was? And when Darnold goes off somewhere else, can he sustain it? And boy, did he ever. And I think some of that has to go on the coach as well, right? The player and the coach, both have a part in that. So Kubiak is really intriguing to me. Excuse me. It's shadows, it's echoes of Shanahan, right? Son of a coach, right? Offensive mind. Does he come in and become that guy? If you want to take a shot at the next brilliant offensive mind, head Shanahan, McVay type, this is the guy I think you take the shot with, right? He's got the family tree. He's been around coaching. He's in one of the right kind of offensive system, family trees, coaching trees. So if you want to go all in on taking your shot at having that next guy, to me, this is the guy. Maybe there's a little more risk reward. Maybe there's some other guys, that like Joe Brady that have a little more experience that are maybe a little more down the fairway. But this is to me, if you're taking a shot at trying to find the brilliant offensive mind, and be an early investor in him, so to speak, this is the guy.
Yeah, he was with the Denver Broncos previously, was with the Minnesota Vikings underneath Kevin Stefanski and Mike Zimmer, so you got a West Coast background. He also was under Norv Turner previously, so you're talking about a bunch of deep passes, deep drop play actions, kind of what we had expected a little bit to see from the Arizona Cardinals this season, honestly. Like, I think it fits really well with Michael Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Trey McBride, the sort of offense that he would run, in addition to being able to be very run heavy as far as for the approach, using some of those different tight ends. It'd be a very, very natural fit for, I think, the sort of personnel that Arizona has. More so than what we saw, which was, I think, being able to have one singular guy in the passing game as far as Trey McBride, having a secondary guy in the passing game in Michael Wilson, and then a third guy in Marvin Harrison Jr., and then shuffling at least between Michael Wilson and Marvin Harrison Jr. for where it was. That's one of those places where, like you're talking about, it really is one of those spots where he comes from a huge backdrop of a lot of these really great offensive minds, including the Kyle Shanahan system. He was their passing coordinator in 2023, went to the Saints to be the offensive coordinator. And ultimately, like, I think people forget, but when he went to be the offensive coordinator, they hung 40 points in those first 2 games where he was the OC, and then the offense kind of petered out after that. Some of it was that Derek Carr was set to retire because he got hurt and injured that year. They turned to the 5th-round pick out of Arizona, Spencer Rattler, for the remainder of that part of the season. But it's one of those places where if you're going to talk about home run hires, at least, because you know that one of those guys who would bring a Shanahan tree guy with him is going to be the last guy we just talked about in Robert Saleh. This is a Shanahan tree guy directly you'd be going to in Marcos. That would be huge, I think, when you're talking about having to compete with McVay and Shanahan. You would probably get the 3rd best offensive mind in the division by simply going to the division with Clint Kubiak.
Yeah, exactly. And he has experience knowing how to attack these defenses, especially since one of those defenses is on his own team. So when he faces them in practice, he not only knows like the ins and outs of how these defenders operate, like the defensive schemes that Mike McDonald runs. So that would be the advantage. You would essentially, in hopes, make that like team weaker by having to take him away from the Seattle Seahawks. My only question, my only issue would be with him is like, how is he as a leader? Because if you're bringing him over, yes, you're bringing over the philosophy. He's most likely going to be calling plays. So it's going to be one of those situations where you got the brilliant offensive-minded head coach who'd be calling plays, coaching the team, having somebody just below him, you know, being his offensive coordinator, which is just basically just the assistant, and hopefully he brings over like somebody who's a smart defensive mind on to coach opposite, you know, the defense and whatnot. But is he going to be able to lead this entire team? Because to me, he gives off Mike McDonald vibes to me, and Mike McDonald has no, not Mike McDonald's, Mike McDaniels, right? Anyways, the coach for the Dolphins, he gives off those type of vibes as being a genius, a crazy offensive mind. But then you hear these little like trickling like rumors about like how people don't respect him, that his own players like look at this guy and they don't respect him because he does not a commanding person.
It was what happened with Cliff Kingsbury previously when you hired a young offensive coordinator, the young offensive mind. That's kind of the natural thing that goes along with it.
So I would hope that, like, if he is able to get the job here with Arizona, that he is able to command that respect, because the Dolphins organization has had players, and of course they have their own toxicity in mind with some of the players, Tyreek Hill, who would call out like these situations. And same thing went with Tua. Tua literally got in a press conference and called him out. So that would be my own thing, but this would be a good hire for us.
Yeah, that's something that'd be interesting to find out, would be how much of it is like a Mike McDonald area in a situation. We also haven't even talked about Mike McDonald. He's not on or Mike McDaniel, I should say. He is not on our list tonight. We're looking at current head coaching available candidates. There is an interesting case of maybe Miami ends up being a spot for John Harbaugh, and that ends up being the case there, where we end up seeing that as a transition. Let's take time now for halftime for the Red Bird Reboot podcast. I'm going to call out some of our comments here. We got Brian is saying that Saleh is the front runner right now, is what he's saying, at least for the most part. That's what he's talking about. We've got David Renteria. Hey, David, saying he really doesn't want another defensive head coach, is what he's reaching out to say. We got Josh Espidal is saying, I'd just say Harbaugh or Stefanski. My 2 cents, those two could turn it around. Well, Accelerator is a no on Clint Kubiak, saying he was awful in New Orleans. He's got to have a stacked squad. I don't know if they'd call that Seattle offense a stacked squad for the most part. I mean, like, Darnold has been great, and we know that the receiver has been great. We'll have to see exactly how well that is for the most part. And then we've got David Renteria just keeping it simple, saying just get one of those three. He doesn't care who it is. He says just get one of those three guys moving forward. That's something that's going to be really interesting to say, because I think a lot of Cardinals are just looking for a good coach for the most part here. And then we've got another last comment on Sala from Keith Davis saying Sala was 20-36 in New York, picked his own coordinators, not sure he'd turn around. And then he fawned over Aaron Rodgers on Hard Knocks, not a plus. I think a lot of people still have respect for Aaron Rodgers as a quarterback in the league. Obviously, there's so much that comes with Aaron Rodgers. I think it'd be grateful, honestly, to say that after going through the last off season, if you do hire Robert Sala, you can say that Aaron Rodgers would not be coming to Arizona. That much I think we can say is going on for sure.
I want to throw out one more, and there's some comments about Harbaugh. Just one kind of argument for why maybe it might not be. Like, Harbaugh is a guy you have to go all in on. Like, you're doing everything he wants to bring him here, and understandably so. And he's a really good coach. But, like, I'm a big fan of the Baltimore Ravens philosophy of how they build their team. The organizations just run really well. Going back to Ozzie Newsome when he was their general manager, they draft well consistently. They just do a really good job building a team. And I worry how much of this is John Harbaugh is a B plus coach in an A plus organization that had A minus results, if that makes sense. And you put that B plus coach in we go with the NFL players, report card F organization, but let's be generous and say a C minus organization. That you might need to try to find someone who is going to be better. And maybe I'm wrong about him, but when you look at that, he was in such a good organization, and you can't at least ignore how that played some part in his success. And I'm not trying to. I think he's a good coach, but he might not be as good as people think he is.
Those are all really good points, at least here. I think that's something I'm very curious about to see, because
Aaron Rodgers is in the house.
Hey, there we go. At least for that, love to see it. At least for the most part, good to see Rod. I still have respect, fools. He says, "There you go." Aaron Rodgers, SZ, fantastic. All right, so let's go ahead here, and we're going to continue with our discussion. We're going to focus on a guy that is really intriguing, I think, at least because not of where he's at, but when you look at his track record, and that's going to be Thomas Brown, the passing game coordinator for the New England Patriots. Now, Drake may win the MVP this year. That passing game has been on fire. Like, he's been phenomenal as a passer. You take a look at where he previously came from. He was in-house with the Carolina Panthers, but what he's most known for in a lot of cases was he worked with the 2024 Chicago Bears as the quarterback's coach and passing game coordinator. Their offensive coordinator was Shane Waldron. Now, the Bears ended up being in a unique spot. If you take a look at their schedule, I'll pull it up over here. They essentially started off 4-2 that year. And you take a look at how easy their schedule was. They had the easiest schedule in the NFL. When the game started getting hard, that offense looked absolutely miserable. Lost to the Commanders, blown out by the Cardinals, blown out by the Patriots. You can see exactly where Thomas Brown took over as the offensive coordinator for the team. It was November 17th, 24th, and 28th. They were at 19-20, close loss. 27-30, close loss. Detroit Lions, 20-23, close loss. He was the offensive coordinator for those games where the offense went from averaging, I believe it was, only, I think it was 7-8 points per game that they were averaging, to averaging about 2 points per game. And then what happened after that loss to the Detroit Lions? Well, he became the head coach. And the thing that some people have said about Thomas Brown was, in that Bears season, he was the only adult in the room when it came to between him, Matt Eberflus, who's been now fired by the Dallas Cowboys. The Shane Waldron was fired before the beginning of the season. He was like the one person that you could rely on that coaching staff. He goes now to the Patriots, and Drake May has a all-pro level season. Goodness, this is one of those guys where, like you're saying, it would be that young, up-and-coming offensive coordinator. You're poaching from one of the best teams in the league. It's something where he's not necessarily the play caller. That would be Josh McDaniels right now, but he is the passing game coordinator. And a lot of guys look at him as ultimately fitting some of those leadership roles. He's got previous coach experience, granted, as an interim coach, kind of a young up and comer that maybe his year wouldn't be this year, but he would get an offensive coordinator job and be like a primary top option for a team potentially next year. Joe, some of your thoughts at least on Thomas Brown, because he's kind of one of those unknowns out there, but to me it's like he's an adult when a lot of people weren't adults, and that's something the Arizona Cardinals could really use.
I find him intriguing. You know, I'm looking at his coaching experience, and the thing that stands out to me is this is not the cliche quarterback whisperer offensive coach. He started out in college as a running backs coach, running game coordinator, offensive coordinator, like lots of stops in college, then into the pros. You know, running a lot of running backs and then tight ends coach, then offensive coordinator, then passing game coordinator. And to me, what I see when I look at his resume and the things you've talked about, and is like the success in New England. It's not that he's gone in there and been a quarterback whisperer who's turned Drake May into the second coming of whoever you want to describe him as. It's more that I think he's helped build an offense that's allowed Drake May to be successful. If that makes sense. And I think when you look at all those things, I think this is the guy that could come in and build a holistic offense. And you're not bringing him in to fix a quarterback. You're bringing him in to fix an offense that a quarterback can succeed in. And I do find that intriguing. In fact, when you think about it, because there's so much uncertainty with the quarterback situation, I think there's an argument you could make. Hey, we don't know. Are they going to go with Brissett next year? Are they going to go with Kyler? Are they going to wait till 27 to draft a quarterback? And because they're not going to be in a good position to get one of the top two, or they're going to take a quarterback later. If they are not going to trade up to get one of the early quarterbacks, I think you could make an argument that this is the right fit offensively, because he's going to come in and fix the offense. He's going to invest in the running game, the receivers, the tight ends. He's going to make the whole offense better and not just focus on fixing the quarterback, right? So whoever's quarterback in 27 and 28 and beyond, he's built a good foundation for them. So if you're going the offensive side, I think there's a really interesting argument for this guy.
I do too. You take a look at his history and just his area. If you want to go, I'll give my comparison for him for like the high end comparison in a bit, but he was a player for multiple years, at least as a running back, was more prolific as a college player, but he started off as a strength and conditioning coach, which that means he knows and understands like injuries and how to be able to take care of that. Worked as a running backs coach in college, ended up kind of becoming the running backs coach under Sean McVay from 2020 to 2022. So you're talking kind of about the post Todd Gurley years, ultimately, with I think 1 year of Todd Gurley, but he's been under the McVay tree, which is like everyone knows Kyle Shanahan was like one of those guys under the McVay tree. That's like the entire tree you pull from. Went to be the Panthers offensive coordinator in 2023, ended up taking over at least ultimately in 2023 with, I believe, the Bryce Young draft pick. That was one of those years where it just did not work with Frank Reich. Things did not kind of mesh. Wasn't until the end of the year that things kind of were able to work properly. Was the passing game and offensive coordinator, like we said, for the Bears. But you're talking about a guy who comes from that McVay tree, who's an overall look at the offense. One of the thoughts I had of a former player who's respected and knows all aspects, at least, of an offense or a team to be able to kind of build this holistic approach. Kind of sounds like a Dan Campbell, former player, has this holistic approach, one of those guys that's able to be kind of a program builder. One of the big reasons why I'd love to see a Thomas Brown present. Before we move on, Marcos, any last thoughts about Thomas Brown? Because we're going to have to start hitting the quick button here to make sure that we can get to Bird and goals
Thomas
coming
Brown
up.
has thoughts.
That's what I was about to say. He just got in the chat. He says he's coming over to AZ because of TCR and the Cardinal Rule podcast. So
there you go. That's the answer right there, at least for the most part. We don't have to go out and have this show anymore. We're just all set to roll.
We've got the answer, right?
I think we're good now. No, I'm just joking. So Thomas Brown, my thoughts about him is that for me, it's got Cardinals written all over it because he's a guy that's like kind of flying under the radar. First time like head coach, first time, I'm not sure he's not the play caller over in New England, is he? No, it's Josh McDaniels. That's right.
It's Josh McDaniels, yeah.
So it's working under like Josh McDaniels. So that's the reason why I see this as like Cardinals, because I think that's the direction the Cardinals would go. That's usually what they do. They either get a coordinator and elevate him as a head coach. They get somebody that they want the philosophy from, like they did with Cliff Kingsbury, bringing him up. or they're just going to get somebody who they believe, okay, well, this guy is a builder, but this guy is somebody that's in a lower level. We can 100% hire him as a head coach, because why is he going to say no to that?
Yeah, all good points there. At least let's say, oh, now Thomas Brown is also, I believe, so far, he's the first of the candidates we've talked about that actually has had an interview requested. As far as with the other candidates, there has been no confirmed areas of request of an official interview. We do know, based off of the numbers, that the Cardinals have definitely reached out about Robert Saleh, but we haven't had that officially confirmed. We do know also another person who's been officially confirmed for an interview itself, is interviewing on Friday, is going to be Matt Nagy, the Chiefs offensive coordinator. We don't have to spend as much time, but a lot of boxes he checks. Former head coach, had a pedigree where they got to the playoffs, so there's some winning involved, has been a part of the Kansas City Chiefs. But my caution is I take a look at that offense from when he's the offensive coordinator, and here's the way it was described to me. Matt Nagy did a great job of taking Alex Smith and helping him play like Alex Smith when he was with the Chiefs. He did a great job then of taking Mitch Trubisky and making him play like Alex Smith when he was with the Chicago Bears for a number of years. He did a great job of making Nick Foles look like Alex Smith. He's also done a great job of making Patrick Mahomes play and look a lot like Alex Smith since Eric Bieniemy left that team, since they traded away Tyreek Hill. I feel like it's one of those spots of where sure, boxes are checked. I also think that he's probably going to be in time for the Tennessee job. This would be one of those places where is he going to be an elevation above Jonathan Gannon? The answer is probably yeah, because he had some more wins, got to the playoffs. He did more than Gannon did with the Chicago Bears when they were at just as bad of or of a worse time. But I don't feel like he's one of those guys that's an up-and-comer so much as I feel like he's one of those guys that you kind of would be expecting him to get you to 8-8, and then you fire him because you're kind of going 8-8 every single year. Joe, some of your thoughts at least on Matt Nagy, and if there's any Bears fans in the chat, please stay away at least just in case something does go on with Matt Nagy, because I know a lot of Bears fans are not fans of him whatsoever.
Yeah, this doesn't excite me. I mean, to me, it just feels like, and I think you hit a really great nail on the head with the quarterback. How he makes everyone Alex Smith, but like he was the offensive coordinator with Patrick Mahomes, right? And wasn't and didn't show when he had his own gig that he was really the reason Patrick Mahomes was Patrick Mahomes, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, I'm not saying he's a good coach. He's an NFL offensive coordinator. He could maybe be a successful head coach in the right organization, but he is not coming in here in my mind and elevating this team where they need to be. So this is just not a name that excites me at all.
Yeah, I know. That's with some of the comments, at least. Dana's leaving one saying, when you look at Matt Nagy's arrival in an organization, you can chart the offensive fall off. And that is something that we have seen overall. Like, he'll go and arrive to different places, and a lot of times the offense has gone worse. In Chicago, it did get better. So that's why I think it's a worthwhile option. A lot of our comments are like saying no. Like, most of them are like saying, please, God, not Matt Nagy, or Matt Nagy's a no. Like, and that's something I'd say is I think most of the fans, this would not be one of those instantly you're going to win or that you get excited about as a fan base. Speaking of hires you're not excited about, we're going to talk about, and we'll lump this one in with Matt Nagy. Former Falcons head coach Raheem Morris, he is coming in for an interview that has actually been next week with the Cardinals, Titans, and Giants. We just got an update from Adam Schefter that said that John Harbaugh is not taking any interviews until next week. That means that you don't have to worry about any sort of team getting in or seeing stuff first. We'll see how that process all plays out. Raheem Morris, defensive coordinator for the Rams the year they won the Super Bowl, was formerly a head coach, I believe, with the Titans have requested an interview for him. He formerly was a head coach with the Buccaneers. It did not work out. Was then a head coach with the Falcons. It also did not work out. He's had more winning than Jonathan Gannon, but this is the same sort of not really impressive sort of a hire that I think the fans or people would be looking for here. Marco, some of the thoughts you have with Raheem Morris, because Falcons were a better defense this year. I think a lot of that goes to they added 2 first-round edge rushers, and they still were not an elite defense this year, but they were by the end of the year making plays. Thoughts on Raheem Morris?
Yeah, that was a pretty good defense, and I will say it's more of like a talented base defense than the schematic one. When he was with the Rams, there was actually a drop off, believe it or not, from Brandon Staley to Raheem Morris. So to me, when I found out that he was getting a head coaching job, I always often question that: is it because they won the Super Bowl with him? Because Aaron Donald was on that line of on the defensive line, so. It was more of like, hey, the guys love him, they respect him. He has I mean not head coach written all over him with the pedigree and what he's gonna do. And of course, we saw the decisions being made when they signed Kirk Cousins and they immediately drafted Penix eighth overall. Which pretty much shocked everybody. You gave Kirk Cousins that big contract, and then should have known how his knee wasn't going to be able to hold up to be able to even like hand the ball off from under center, so you couldn't even run that type of offense. This Atlanta Falcons team is a team just waiting for a good head coach to take over
Hmm.
because of the fact that the amount of talent that they have on both sides of the ball, it's tremendous. And the fact that somebody like Raheem Morris wasn't able to elevate them to be able to be a playoff contender in a division that's kind of weak. Like those were just that was just it for Arthur Smith. I mean, not Arthur Smith. That was just it for the owner
Is
of
it for
the
him? Is
Falcons.
it for the GM? It was it for everybody? I do think that it's probably he was in a bad situation because of the quarterback spot, but I agree with you. He just didn't really elevate a lot of the talent to what we had seen. I would not be shocked at all if we see the Giants be able to go out and get John Harbaugh, and that a team like the Falcons goes and gets Kevin Stefanski, who seems to be kind of the number 2 candidate in the profile. We haven't seen the Cardinals request to interview Stefanski. I could see a request for an interview go in. I don't know if that interview would actually happen, but we do know that there is a request that has been put in so far. We now move on real quick to Anthony Weaver, someone who's Cardinals have put in a request to interview him. That's one of the guys, the defensive coordinator for the Dolphins, highly respected, considered valuable. He's a guy that is not currently in the playoffs, so you can be able to do as many interviews as you want with him. This is one of the cases of you're looking for like a leader of men. He's got a lot of respect, has been in the head coaching cycle for multiple years. I don't see him as one of those like this is the guy who's got the pedigree, who's going to get instant wins in year one for the Cardinals. He, I think, strikes me as similar to Raheem Morris, but without the experience that comes in ultimately. There hasn't been as much elevation. Joe, some of your thoughts at least there on Anthony Weaver, a guy who's not as well known, but maybe it's one of those cases where he just ends up being a gem in the rough for the Cardinals.
I think if you're going defensive coach, you've got to go a proven stud like Saleh, right? And so he may end up getting a head coaching job and be successful somewhere, but I don't think he would be successful here part because the organization, and just, and maybe I would say something similar to him with him as well. He's a coordinator, so you can't really poach him. But
Right.
with like Raheem Morris, for example, you're just talking about, for me, Raheem Morris is not exciting. That's a guy though, if we got an offensive, like a LaFleur, Kubiak or Brown, Raheem Morris as the defensive coordinator, with as an experienced guy, that might even be why they're interviewing him, to be honest, with the hope that when he doesn't get a head coaching job, they can convince him to come and be the defensive coordinator for a guy like a Thomas Brown. But yeah, Weaver, I think, no disrespect to his future and his potential. He may very well be a successful head coach, but I don't think this is the right spot for him, and he's not the right coach for us.
Yeah, he was the best known, at least, as the Houston Texans defensive line coach from 2016 to 2019, and then he was their defensive coordinator in 2020. He then moved to the Baltimore Ravens as their defensive line coach in 2021 to 2023. So you're talking about having the J.J. Watt on your team and then moving to that vaunted Ravens defensive line. That's part of why I think that he's been very respected. He then moved to the Miami Dolphins this year as their DC. I don't think they've been talent-wise what they've needed to be, but I also think that that's part of that respect that carries over. And he's a former player as well. So you want to talk about potentially a defensive version, at least, of what the Dan Campbell aspect of someone who's played that before. He would be probably the defensive version of Thomas Brown for this cycle. Marcos, before we move on to our last coach, at least, any quick thoughts, at least, because I do want to make sure that we're going to getting over and spending plenty of time to talk about the last man on their list. Some would say saving the best for last, or at least saving the familiar for last. And that would be defensive coordinator of the I believe Denver Broncos, who I've photoshopped here into what he would look like as a Cardinals head coach, as I joked on Twitter. Vance Joseph, Cardinals have requested to interview him. He's got the number 1 ranked defense. I'm sorry, as my dog has been whining a little bit here in the background. Number 1 ranked defense here for the Arizona Cardinals. A dog is growling because I know a lot of Cardinals fans would not be fans of bringing Vance Joseph in here to be the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. I think that there is a possibility to it, depending on he's supposed to be bringing along a I believe it's Davis Webb is his offensive coordinator, who is a guy that's up and coming in the ranks as a hot offensive coordinator name that's coming up in there. You know, he's the leader of men. He's got connections with the Cardinals. There's a lot of things that have popped up here. And if you want to look at for someone who's got head coaching experience, he's got head coaching experience and was essentially the defensive head coach for the Arizona Cardinals. He's that kind of guy that you might be able to get. Buda Baker would probably be running up and down, jumping, excited to have Vance Joseph back in Cardinal red.
Yeah, but the thing about that is like Buda Baker is kind of like getting up aged up there. You're right. He would love this, and so would Zayvon Collins, because I heard that like Zayvon Collins also wanted to keep him as a head coach, and you could almost bet your butt that he's going to move him back to linebacker. So there would be some positives with him. Obviously, him being the head coach means that he's not going to be the defensive play caller. The scheme's also going to come back to being what it was before. I'm not a big fan. You already know. I don't like the off-ball play by the cornerbacks. I don't like, the heavy blitz being the double mugs on second and third down that kind of announces and everything, because my only issue with him is that, like, obviously he left this team to go, well, he didn't leave. He went to the Denver Broncos, and the Denver Broncos were already established and stacked with a bunch of talent. He goes over there, they give up that 70 burger. I'm not sure, like, I heard rumblings about like another defensive not play caller, but a defensive assistant that was hired to help him kind of, right the ship. I know that a lot of players got shuffled up, and then once the players were placed in the right positions, that's when that defense started flourishing. So as a head coach, I think I would be more for that than him being the play caller. And I do know that he would move some players back to positions that I would feel comfortable doing and stuff and whatnot, especially with like someone like Zayvon Collins being placed back to be linebacker instead of just playing him on the outside linebacker the majority of the year. And also the safeties would be the hard-hitting safeties that, like Buda Baker. You'd have a younger version of him and Dadrion Taylor Demerson essentially taking on that role. And I mean, there's some positives to this as well.
Joe, some of your thoughts on Vance, because this is easy and we can talk about the scheme, but go ahead.
I'll keep it super quick because I know we got a podcast that's ready to go right after us.
We do.
This feels like the most Michael Bidwell move ever, doesn't it?
It
like
does.
Bringing in old familiar people.
Yes, it does.
And and it would be the least popular move for the fans. So I'm not really, I don't want to, kind of bash on him. He's done a great job there, and he may be a good head coach somewhere. I don't, he was good with the organization here, I think, in terms of how he conducted himself in a tough situation. But it just makes my eye twitch, just
yes.
like it brings back trauma of the old
Yes,
Michael Bidwell that I thought we were past when he brought in an outside candidate for his general manager. So it's a no for me.
Yeah, I think it'd be a no for me as well. I think I'll wrap it up here with this final comment from Lance. I think we need a head coach with previous head coach experience. He doesn't want a great coordinator who will come in, but he wants a great coordinator under a head coach who can lead. I think that leadership thing is the biggest thing that we'll look at, and we'll find out a little bit more about who is able to lead. Let's do some quick last shout-outs, at least as we're hitting our 7:30 mark. Joe, if you want to be able to pop up to where our viewers are able to find you, obviously if you're on this channel, you're watching this, Joe. That's like the way it is. Me and Marcos are going to be the ones that are on X for the most part. But Joe, if you just want to kind of send us all off tonight, at least here, and then I'll be able to bring up a little bit of talking about what's coming up next on the channel.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me. You know where to find me here on YouTube or on Twitter at JOKOMO13, JOKOMO13. And I'm really glad to be hanging out with you guys. Appreciate you inviting me to be on. And as frustrating as this season was, I'm actually pretty stoked for the offseason. It's bringing in a new coach is exciting. Potentially bringing in a new quarterback is exciting. The draft's going to be exciting. Free agency is going to be exciting. And the young players on the team, the Michael Wilsons of the world, right? The Will Johnsons of the world are worth being excited about. So I think there's exciting days ahead. I'm not going to say there's winning days ahead yet, but there's exciting days ahead. So I think there's at least something to enjoy coming.
For sure. And then for Marcos, that'll be over here. We've got Bird and Goal coming next. It'll be their season finale. They're going to be kind of going on to a semi-hiatus where they're not going to be doing weekly shows, but they'll still pop up for the big news, the coaching hires, draft, other things that'll pop up at least throughout the offseason. Our show is going to continue weekly. For Marcos Labrada, I'm Blake Murphy. This has been part of the Redbird Reboot. We're going over head coaches. We'll find out a little bit more details, hopefully by next week, as to how those interviews went and if there's any new names that pop up. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. We'll take care, everybody.
Peace.